Have you ever stood at a port and just watched a massive container ship glide into dock? It looks so peaceful, right? Almost effortless. But honestly, beneath the surface, there's this intense, high-stakes mechanical and legal ballet happening every single day. And it's driven by some absolutely fascinating hidden power dynamics. Welcome to The Explainer. Think about this for a second. How do you actually stop a 100,000-ton steel behemoth from completely crushing a concrete dock? I mean, this is the ultimate David and Goliath physics problem. These ships are incredibly powerful, but in tight spaces, that sheer power is actually a massive liability. It sounds almost absurd, but to avoid completely destroying the quay with their own immense propelling power, these giant vessels literally have to turn off their engines. They willingly render themselves completely helpless. And that right there is exactly where our story begins. So, here is our roadmap. We're going to start with why these huge ships need so much help, and then we'll dive into the intense legal blame game that kicks off when things go wrong. After that, we'll uncover the unwritten rules of the sea, examine the ultimate contractual shield, and finally, look at how risks are split out on the open ocean. Let's jump into Section 1, Why Huge Ships Need Help. To really understand this world, we have to establish our two main players. First up, we have the tow. This is the vessel that actually needs assistance to be maneuvered. We're talking massive cargo ships, barges, or even oil rigs. And second, we have the tug, that much smaller, highly specialized vessel that provides the motive power. What's absolutely fascinating to me here is the sheer dependency. You have this massive tow, often carrying millions of dollars worth of cargo, and it is completely at the mercy of this tiny tug to get where it needs to go safely. And there are quite a few vital reasons why Goliath needs David. We already mentioned protecting the quay from a huge ship's engine power. But tugs are also the first ones called in when a ship's engines simply break down. They're essential for threading these huge ships through really narrow, restricted waters. They move massive offshore drilling rigs. They assist newly constructed ships that just aren't fully operational yet. And of course, they are the heroes called in to pull out vessels that have unfortunately run aground. Basically, whenever a vessel lacks its own motive power, the tug steps in to save the day. Moving on to Section 2, the blame game and legal liability. As you can probably imagine, when you have a tiny tug trying to maneuver a heavy, massive ship in tight quarters, well, accidents happen. And when a tiny tug crashes a massive barge into a dock, a totally chaotic transfer of control and a very high-stakes blame game begins. Now, in normal reality, the master and crew of the tug are the employees of the tug owner. That makes total sense, right? But if a tug causes an accident, that tug owner could be sued for millions. So the industry created a contractual reality. Towage agreements often state that the tug's crew temporarily become the servants of the tow while carrying out the operation. By transferring this responsibility on paper, the tug owner brilliantly escapes tort liability, which is the legal hook for negligence, for the actions of their very own crew. It's a wild legal maneuver. Now, this paper shield, it works absolute wonders between the two ships that actually signed the contract. But what happens if the tug accidentally crashes into a completely unrelated ship that's just anchored nearby? If the tug hits a third party, that third party does not care at all about the private towage contract between the tug and the tow. Contractual arrangements usually don't affect third parties. So the tug might actually have to pay that third party initially, though, as we're going to see, they usually find a pretty clever way to make the tow pay them back. Which brings us to Section 3, the unwritten rules of towage. Because look, no matter how many clever clauses you cram into a contract, the courts have decided that certain basic rules of the sea just have to apply. The first unwritten rule is the principle of uber rima fide, which means utmost good faith. Take the fascinating little story of the Elliott Steam Tug Company case. A tug was hired to tow an 800-ton lighter, which is a type of barge. But when the tug actually arrived, the crew discovered the water in the narrow channel was entirely too shallow for a tug of their size to even operate. The kicker? The tow owner knew this, but hadn't mentioned a word of it. The court ruled that it was the tow owner's implied duty to disclose those conditions and put the vessel in a position where the tug could actually handle it. Because they didn't, the tug owner was able to claim damages. I mean, common sense, right? You have to tell your tug what they're driving into. The second unwritten rule is that the tug must actually be fit for the job it's hired to do. Let's walk through the disastrous Marshall Souchet case. This vessel was being towed by a tug named the Guyana. The problem was, the Guyana was simply unfit and completely unseaworthy for the voyage. A strong wind came up, totally overpowered this unfit tug, and drove both vessels off course until the tow eventually grounded. Later on, the Guyana actually helped refloat the tow and, get this, had the audacity to claim a salvage award for rescuing it. The court firmly denied the Guyana's claim, and in doing so they established an implied warranty that a tug must be seaworthy, physically fit, and properly equipped for the assigned job. All right, Section 4, the UKSTC, or the Ultimate Tug Shield. So, now that we know the unwritten rules, let's look at the written ones. We are talking about the UK Standard Conditions for Towing, revised in 1986. This contract is heavily used in harbors and ports across the UK, South Africa, Australia, and beyond. And honestly, it exists primarily because, in a port setting, tug owners hold immense, almost monopoly-like bargaining power. Under the UK STC, almost all the risks of towing are placed squarely on the tow. The tow actually has to indemnify the tug, meaning they have to pay for any loss or damage out of their own pocket, even if the damage was caused by the tug's own negligence. Plus, it totally excludes liability for war, strikes, and delays. Furthermore, whoever hires the tug warrants that they have the authority to bind the vessel's owner to these wild terms, and if they don't have that authority, the hirer is personally liable. It is an absolute, ironclad legal shield for the tug owner. But there's a really surprising technicality here. This magical legal force field isn't just turned on all the time. The UKSTC specifically states that the towage service and all these extreme liability protections only commence the exact moment the tow ropes have been passed. The tug has to be in special proximity to the tow, within hailing distance to receive direct orders, and physically connected by the rope. Up until that exact moment the rope is passed, the tug is out there operating entirely on its own risk. It's like flipping a switch. Finally, Section 5, Ocean Towing and Splitting the Risk. So what happens when we leave the harbor? Out on the open ocean or even coastal waters, there are numerous contractors. The competition out there is fierce, which means tug owners just don't have the same monopoly power to force all the risk onto the tow like they do in the ports. Because of this competition, ocean towing uses a much fairer system. It's called knock-for-knock liability. Instead of the tow taking all the blame, under a knock-for-knock agreement, each party just takes care of its own. The tug owner pays for any claims made by the tug's crew, damage to the tug itself, and any damage the tug causes to a third party. And the tow owner? They undertake the exact same responsibility for their own vessel and their own employees. It's a really simple, highly effective method for allocating risk without all that crazy blame shifting we saw with the UKSTC. Let's do a quick contract showdown to see how this all evolves. First, in the harbors, we have the UKSTC, where all the risk is dumped on the tow and it deals mostly with liability rather than specific price structures. Then, developed around 1985, you have two major ocean contracts. Tow hire uses that fair, knock-for-knock liability we just talked about and pays the tug on a time charter basis, which is essentially a daily rate. And finally, you have TowCon, which also uses knock-for-knock, but operates on a lump sum payment structure instead. Let's briefly focus on TowCon's unique setup. Because it's a lump sum agreement, the money is usually fully and irrevocably earned in stages. So you might see an installment paid on signing, one on departure, and the final one on arrival. But because time is absolutely money in this industry, TowCon has very specific ways of handling the financial risks of delay. It gives the tow owner an agreed amount of lay time, which is basically just free time to get ready. But if they go over that time, they have to pay demurrage, which is a delay payment. And if the hire suddenly requests slow steaming, well, the tug owner is entitled to extra compensation for that too. Everything is precisely calculated. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We've seen ships so powerful they literally have to be turned off just to park. We've seen tiny tugs step in to save the day, only to legally hide behind those giant ships if they make a mistake. So the next time you buy a product shipped from overseas, ask yourself, who holds the real power at sea? Is it the giant ships that carry our goods or the tiny tugs they legally shield? It's a bizarre, completely counterintuitive power dynamic, but it is exactly what keeps the global supply chain moving every single day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.